Okay, I have the assembly ready to go back in the car. Transmission is remounted on the axle. I went ahead and temporarily just hand tightened the half shafts back to the transmission. It's easier to do at this point. This is the area I'm talking about. If you've had the transmission off, it's easier to reattach the half shafts at this point than wait until you're having to do all this overhead. At that point we can torque them where they need to be much easier. Went ahead and applied new another run of 3M strip caulk to the shock tower tops. Easier to do now. Of course, I went ahead and flushed the differential, put new oil in it. Again, it's easier to get to at this point. And I've reattached the vacuum line to the vacuum modulator. And I have the torque tube remounted. Also with the foam at the shifter. If you don't have this, you really need to get one. This keeps the heat from just billowing up inside the car. From the front of the bell house to the front of the insulation is approximately 2 feet, and I just have it taped on with electrical tape. Once it's mounted, it's press fit, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere. Have the cables routed properly and attached the way they should be. Let's see if I can get this thing to focus here. The manual tells us to leave the front bell housing loose. I'm going to try to put it in with it bolted in. If I have problems, then I'll make that correction as I go. But it would certainly save if I can get it done, and it looks like I can. I might be wrong, but we'll see as we go. It's another connection that you can make easier now than lying on your back, so we'll give it a shot. Okay, let's get started putting this in. Okay, after I get the assembly under the car approximately where I can get it, and I go ahead and use the strap that we used in the first video to take the assembly out, and go ahead and hook it where it needs to be hooked, and that's the upper sway bar. There's a couple of bends in it that's specifically made for this purpose. And what that will do, it will allow me to reposition the assembly side to side, because you can't really roll it well on floor jacks. They only roll in one direction. And as you can see here, the strap is almost dead vertical on the right side and at an angle on the left. So what will happen is that while I jack this up, take the slack up off the strap, and then lower it, it will swing the assembly almost exactly where I need it under the transmission tunnel, and then I can put the jack back under it and continue to get everything lined up. So let's do that right now. Let's get the slack out. That looks good. Tighten it up. And as I loosen, it should swing to the left, and that's what it's doing. So now I can jack it back up a little bit more. Take a little bit more slack out this time. And it should finish shifting where we need it. There we go. Okay. So we're getting it close to where we need it. Go ahead and get it up off the ground a little bit. See how we look on the front. Okay, it takes a little bit of finagling to get this thing where it needs to be, and I can tell already that I have my strap, which is actually just under the part of the differential that cantilevers out the back of the axle area, and I need to shift it to the front of the axle, or actually the front of the half shafts, so that it will pull the transmission assembly rearward, hopefully a couple of inches, which is what I'm off right now. So let me get that repositioned. I can do that by just jacking it up, taking the strap loose, rerouting it, tightening it up, and then let the assembly move where it wants to move. Okay, I've repositioned the strap under the transmission in front of the half shafts, and now you can see that my strap is actually angled forward. So what will happen is, as I let the transmission suspend from the strap, it should pull the assembly rearward, and that's going to work well because, and it's almost impossible to show with the video, it will line up where I need to be much closer. Let's give that a shot. Okay. Can't really see it, but the well for the shock goes here, and this connection, these two bolts, are where this arm should connect. So you can see that we need to go backwards at least 3 inches or so. So let's see if we can get it pulled back. Okay, I'm going to reposition my jack. Go straight, take a little bit of the stress off the strap, see where we're at. Okay, here's my well, here's my shock tower, here's my connection here. So I'm almost perfectly lined up at this point. So that's where your strap needs to go, is in front of the half shafts for this to align properly. So let's just keep working it up. What we need to do is we have on the front bell housing, there are some guide pins on that bell housing that will need to go in. So as we go up, we're going to have to make sure that we're not forgetting about the front end here and get it worked in there as well. Okay, I've put a jacket under the front of the bell housing, or the rear belt there, and positioned it so that I can roll the whole assembly back just a little bit, and I'll tell you why. Up here at the front, you can see the flywheel the way it was before. The bell housing was lying right straight up with that, and there's a couple of tabs, let me get that, stick out from the flywheel that you're going to have to get the bell housing over and around. So my suggestion is to rotate the motor around to where these tabs are, towards the bottom of the flywheel. Much easier to work the bell housing over it at the bottom as opposed to the very top. And now we'll just try to work this up, get the assembly around the tabs then move the assembly back forward again and see if we can't get this thing lined up and bolted up. It just takes a while. No extra points for going real fast. There's a lot of things you need to look at. Make sure that as you get further up, we need to make sure that these cables and the vacuum line all get fed where they need to be fed, and all of our transmission lines are hanging where they need to hang. Just make sure that as you go, you're checking these sort of things out. Okay, I rotated the motor around to get the flywheel sensor tabs at the bottom of the flywheel. That way I don't have to worry about clearing anything at all as I raise the bell housing. Everything's at the bottom. As long as I don't drop it, those tabs shouldn't be harmed. So right now, as you can see, I need to go a couple of inches forward, and there's some guide pins that will hold this in place, but you can't go one end up higher than the other very much. You have to kind of keep everything fairly level. So it's just slow go, and like I said, I'm a one-man band here, so I have to jack the rear end up a little bit and then check the front and then go to the rear and so on and so forth till it's there. So let's just keep going. Also, don't forget, as you're getting higher and higher with the transmission, that the electrical connections need to go back through this hole, and if you wait until the very end, then you're going to be upset because you can't get your hand up in there. So what I did is I took some zip ties and I zip tied the end of both wire connectors, and as I'm going up, I've got as you can see, the white zip ties are protruding through the hole there, and as I go, not only am I checking clearances, but I'm also taking the slack out of these wire connectors until I can get the connectors free of the chassis hole here. So don't forget about that. It's certainly something that would make you have to drop the whole rear end again if you haven't kept up with it. Also, at this point, keep remembering that you have a couple of the Bowden cable, the flywheel sensor, and a vacuum line that needs to come up through the firewall area here, and so you need to make sure that those are free, not tangled up. You're keeping them stretched so that you won't have to go back and dig, because I have small hands and this area is really tight even for me. Okay, I don't know if you can see this, but there's, on the S4s, the transmission line ties in right in front of the rear bell housing at the torque converter. Now on the earlier cars, this connection is much closer to the motor. But as you're raising the torque tube, make sure that you're not taking that transmission fitting with you. You need to make sure that it's not caught up in the vacuum board and cable that it actually attaches to the torque tube. So yet something else to keep an eye on as you're raising the whole unit into place is just make sure that you're not taking that with you as you go. Another reason to take the whole thing back down if by chance that's what happens. So keep an eye on this, the front cables, the rear cables, the shock towers. Make sure they're not hanging up on the edge of something, because until they're bolted into place, they tend to lean extremely. So just go slow, take it easy, and you know, it might take you a couple of hours, but you'll get there. Okay, it's close. Got about 1.5 inches here. I'm pulling down, making sure that the shock tower bolts are not hanging up, or the studs there are not hanging up on the body. The last thing you want to do is jack this and then let it catch the body and jack it up off the jack stand. That would not be safe at all. So you can always pull down, out, and get the studs clear. Okay, so that's looking good there. This side looks okay, no wires. I've already checked the transmission lines, everything's free there. Let me check the front bell housing. Anything's a little bit hot. Let it down just a little. There we go. Looks good. I've got an extra bunch of wood under here just for my own safety, and now I'm going to check up through the engine bay, looking down. I've got about an inch gap at the top of the bell housing, and keep in mind that this is also raising it with the front bell housing already bolted to the torque tube, and the manual I believe says to do that loose, but I said, well, it doesn't come off loose, so surely it can go one bolted up, and it did, or at least it looks like it will. Okay, I'm going up. Let's see where I'm at. Looking real good on this side. A little bit. Okay. All right. So I have 4 outside bolts in temporarily. I have a wood support under midway that's fixed. I'm going to take the slack off the strap here for safety's sake. Tighten this up a little bit. 17. There we go. If these 4 go in, then everything in the rear should line up. Should take very little prodding to get things. And like I said, I'm going to take these back out, coat them with the either anti-seize or Loctite, whichever the manual calls for, and properly torque them. But for now, I'm just using it to get the rear set in place. I will take one out at a time to torque. Okay, that's the problem. Get another piece of wood or two. Boy, that's starting to look shaky, but gotta do what you gotta do. Work with what you got, what you have. Okay. Now once I know that the gap is closed up enough that the guide pin has engaged the bell housing, I went ahead and pulled the jack out so that you don't have any unwanted tension while you're bolting it up. So once you get close enough that the guide pin locks in, go ahead and loosen up your jack so that the bolt can do its job. Okay, got the two top in, and I went ahead and torqued them. Now we're going to reinstall the Bowden cable. So let's take this clip back off that I had installed. Slide this through the opening. Push. There's a little bit of a area to insert here. Now mine does not have, it's probably been taken off long ago, but there is also a backup wire clip here that should secure the ball and keep it from falling off. But like I said, mine's long gone. So and this needs to be fairly taut, not a lot of slack. Now the flywheel sensor, and I think because I'm going to put some anti-seize on this, anytime you put a bolt into aluminum you probably ought to use anti-seize. Whichever kind. Okay, I went ahead and reattached the flywheel sensor. This is actually a diagnostic piece. I don't think it's really used unless you have the proper tools, but at any rate it attaches to the intake with a 5mm Allen wrench. So we got that done. Cord and cable, Bowden, however you want to pronounce it. There's a vacuum line way back here that I wish I could show you, but I can't. It needs to be hooked back up. We'll hook the heater valve that I took loose over here, over on the passenger side, to access that top passenger bolt. We'll reattach it. Don't forget to add a little bit of fluid. You probably lost a little when and if you took that heater valve loose. I'm going to go on and free up the mat. Put that off there. Make sure you see it. There we go. These are 10mm. Should be 4. I don't have that many. Mine's been broken. So there we go. Pull out a little bit. Put these caps on. There we go. Okay, I've got the base bolted down with 10mm bolts. Go ahead and put the air filter in. Using a used one, or the one that came off the car, make sure dirty side out, huh? Okay. make sure this is seated as well as you can. And however you need to position these fitting as tight as possible. And there. Okay, let's move to the inside of the car and get these shock towers bolted up. Go. Okay, we can go on and remount the brake caliper. Have my brake bolts. Just try to keep all your bolts separated. A whole lot easier to find bolts in this condition than a whole coffee can full of miscellaneous. So anyways, we get this cut down. Yep. That line out of the way. There we go. And we'll back side. Loctite on these because it's steel into steel, but for now we're just gonna get them on. We're not gonna torque them quite yet. Okay, now would be a good time to go on and connect up your transmission fluid line here on an S4, and of course on an earlier model there up front. But I'm going to go on and tighten this fitting up and then also put the other fitting on the other side and get it snug. Okay, after the wires are connected, go on and put the cover back on. It slides on 2 tabs there, and there's one 10mm nut that will screw on there and hold the cover in place. Okay, well, we have our torque wrench and 19mm set at 60 foot-pounds. We can go on and torque the 2 19mm bolts off the back side of the caliper. That's 2 per caliper. Go on and torque those. Okay, and while you're torquing, go on and torque the 17mm. There's 4, 2 per side. The outboard axle bolts at 33 foot-pounds. Then go inside, and the shock towers can be torqued now. They are 17mm as well, and they are also 33 foot-pounds. So torque those 3 per side. Okay, let's go on and get the emergency brake hooked up. I'm going to insert emergency cable through this hole and then push where the seat's here. It's a metal sleeve and it's just it doesn't thread in, it's just a fitted connection. So just push it and then we'll get the inside squared away as far as the emergency brake is concerned. Okay, once we're inside, we want to put the small nut, and this is actually the lock nut, on the cable, and then thread the cable into the fitting here, this bracket. And at this point, if you have it marked as to where it went or where it was adjusted, then that's great. At any rate, what we need to do is just tighten it up. Once we get it about where we need it, put the spring back on. But anyways, get that hooked up, then we can adjust as needed. We're going to need the emergency brake to torque the half shaft bolts. Okay, we're going to go ahead and tighten up the drop link off the rear sway bar. It's a 17 millimeter bolt with a 17 millimeter head or nut, and it needs to be counter held, so let's just get this nice and snug. The bottom bolt would be at 33 foot-pounds, so I'm going to put this one at 33 as well, 33 foot-pounds. Okay, if you've taken the half shafts loose and you have them fingered tight now, it's time to torque these bolts. They are 8 millimeter Allen head, and they should be torqued at 58 foot-pounds of torque. And to do this, you're going to have to use your emergency brake. So go ahead and torque what you can reach. There's 6 per side. So torque what you can reach, and then release the emergency brake, rotate it where you can access the other 3, and then set your emergency brake again so that you can actually get some torque on these bolts. So let's go ahead and torque all 12 at 6 per side. Okay, now we're at the front of the drive rod, and we're going to go ahead and bolt the clamp to the flex plate. It's held on with 15 millimeter bolts. They are torqued at 45 foot-pounds of pressure, and I'm going to use Loctite on those. Now these are the bolts I'm talking about. And then depending on which clamp you have, this is the Constantine super clamp. There's a different tightening procedure for this as opposed to the standard clamp. But let's go ahead and get the clamp bolted to the motor. Okay, I've got my clamp torqued the way Constantine has his instructions done, but if you're using the old clamp, which is this, the pinch bolt is an 8 millimeter and it's at 60 foot-pounds of pressure. So go ahead and torque that down. Now would be a good time, or actually before you do any of this, is to check your flex plate flatness with a straight edge. Make sure it's not bowed in. If it is, do whatever it takes to get it flat again. I had to take, mine was a little bit bowed, and I had to take the bolts loose here, and eventually it popped loose. I checked my end play, and it was within spec, so I'm feeling pretty good about my thrust bearing issue, or non-issue. So but anyways, go ahead and get that squared away, and now the rear end, the transmission, is linked to the motor. Okay, we're almost there. Now we need to put the braces back in. This is the small brace that goes towards the very end. This is the torque converter end of the drivetrain, held in with 13 millimeter bolts. No torque spec, so just snug them up real nice and tight. The 3 screw connection needs to go towards the rear of the car. And let's get this on, and then we'll get the other brace. Okay, now we're going to put the front brace in. This is also held in with 4 13mm bolts. No torque spec, just snug it up nice and tight. And it's oriented with the flat side towards the rear, I guess is the best way to put it. At any rate, let's get that in. Okay, I started with the heat shields. This is the passenger side at the flywheel end. There's a screw up here and down here. Go ahead and put those in. That's 8mm sheet metal screws. It's awfully tight up in there. I'm trying to show you as best I can. This is the driver's side again with a, let's see if I can get this screw here, screw there. Let's go on and get those in. You're going to still have to put the O2 sensor up through the floorboard here, but I think if you think you're going to have trouble, you can do this heat shield later. But I've already done this once, and I could get this in there. Of course, I've got fairly small hands, so. But at any rate, that's the hole for the O2 when the exhaust finally goes in. So go ahead and get those 2 heat shields on. Okay, guys, I went ahead and just put the rest of the heat shields on. I didn't think I needed to go into too much depth on it. It's, you know, basically just there's 2 at the rear where the mufflers will be, 1 at the center, and just simply just use your if you've kept your heat shield fasteners together, you know, just get them up there, and we're down to the exhaust, so that's the next step. Okay, we have the exhaust bolted on. Don't forget about your metal gasket in here. You see this bracket, and I know it's dark, but the bottom bell housing 19mm bolt actually goes in now, and those are torqued at 56 foot-pounds. And the reason why I waited until now is because there are brackets that stabilize the exhaust manifold and the exhaust that kind of piggyback on those bolts. Same thing with the passenger side. So if you can get this exhaust bolted up in the 19mm torqued to 56 foot-pounds, then I went ahead and added the oh goodness, and it's really hard. I know, I'm sorry, it's tied up under here. I went ahead and put the bottom cover on. It's held on with 6 13mm bolts with anti-seize or aluminum, or bolt into aluminum, so they're not torqued. Just snug them there, and you're done up front. Okay, so all that's left now is to hang the exhaust. You know, like I said, exhaust varies so much. Just wherever you have your exhaust hangers, go on and make sure that your exhaust is attached and supported where it needs to be. And after this, we'll put the wheels on, and we need to add transmission fluid. So let's get this exhaust finished.